Welcome everybody to this inaugural session of our Distinguished Speaker Series on Trustworthy Information. I'm David Bannon. I'm stepping in here for Marty Hurst, our head of school, who organized this series, but unfortunately couldn't make it today. But I'm happy to do so, because I'm happy to introduce Hany Farid, who is our first speaker. Hany is a professor both in the information school and in computer science. He is a pioneer in the field of digital forensics and has a lot of really important work in the space of forensic science, misinformation, image analysis, and also human perception as it interacts with these kind of areas. His work recently has focused a lot on how to detect how photos and videos have been either doctored or are fake entirely. Right, so a really important area, as we've seen the rise of computer vision models that are increasingly amazingly accurate at synthesizing images that just don't exist in the real world. This is incredibly important, not just for understanding how images are fake, but also to think about the converse side of this, right? To understand how we can authenticate images as being not doctored, as being original or authentic to some degree. He's worked on understanding the degree to which these automatically generated images can also be perceptually convincing to people, how they do really function as deepfakes in terms of how people perceive them as being real. This has important consequences also for the kind of policy and governance implications that these technologies have in the world. Hany has received the Alfred P. Sloan Fellowship, Guggenheim Fellowship, and is also a fellow of the National Academy of Inventors. He is prolific. Right, not just in terms of his publications that include his works, his books on photo forensics from 2016 and fake photos in 2019, but also in his media appearances for understanding and trying to drum up real public interest in these really critical technology and technological problems. You may have seen him on CNN, on Nova, on Good Morning America, on the Today Show. He has by far the longest IMDb page than any academic I think I've ever come across. But also his important advocacy work as well for testifying before Congress on these important issues on disinformation. So today, Hany is going to be talking to us about disinformation and deepfakes. So welcome, Hany. I don't know which I'm more proud of. I have a Paul Erdős number of 2, but I have a Kevin Bacon number of 3. Not sure which one I'm more proud of. Thanks to Marty Hurst, who I think is on the webinar and is recovering from COVID, who unfortunately couldn't be here. But thanks, Marty, for organizing this. I think if anybody should be talking about disinformation, it should be people in the School of Information. And I think while this problem has been around for many, many, many decades, as long as there's been information, I think it has taken a new sense of urgency in the last 5 years. And I want to talk with you a little bit about why I think that is and what some of the things are that we might be able to do about that. So let me go back to 2015. Here in the US, surveys found that 4% of Americans believe that lizard people control society. This is not a euphemism. These people believe that there are lizards from outer space wrapped in human skin, walking the halls of Capitol Hill. I've met members of Congress. I know where this idea comes from, but I'm fairly sure it's not true. 7% of Americans believe the moon landing was fake, 14% believe Bigfoot exists, and 15% of people believe that the US government adds mind-controlling television, mind-controlling technology to TV. And if you had asked me in 2015, do I care? I would have said no. Couldn't care less. There's a bunch of crazy people who believe weird things and they wear tinfoil hats. I don't care. And I would have been wrong. And I would have been wrong. Oh, let me fast forward first. That was 7 years ago. At the height of the pandemic, we went from those quirky little conspiracies to a very different picture. And now, surveys that we did, as well as Reuters and Ipsos, found 17% of Americans, and these numbers, by the way, are worldwide also, believe the core tenets of QAnon, that Satan-worshiping cannibalistic pedophiles plotted against Trump, among many other very weird, far-reaching conspiracies, primarily targeting Democrats. 22% of Americans believe that Bill Gates plans to use vaccines to implant tracking microchips. I would like to ask these people why Bill Gates has to do this, since we've all strapped the mother of all tracking devices to our face 18 hours a day. We've given it up. He doesn't have to implant it. We've done it voluntarily, but here we are, 22%. 37% of Americans believe global warming is a hoax.
and half of Republicans believe that Trump is, in fact, the rightful president if he won the presidency. And now we've gone from these quirky lizard people moon landing conspiracies to, well, let's see, existential threats to our health. 1 in 5 Americans don't want to get vaccinated. Existential threats to our planet. A third of people believe that global climate change is not something we should worry about. And existential threats to our democracy. January 6th was a perfectly rational response if you in fact believe that President Trump is the rightful president. That's a rational response. And now it's not so funny anymore, is it? We're looking at a very different landscape, and these numbers are not single digits. Look at these numbers, that's insane. And this is not a uniquely American problem. I'm looking at American numbers, but these numbers don't change much as you work around the world. Here's the biggest problem. When you believe in conspiracies, you believe not only that Bill Gates is trying to plant a device, but you also believe that the government, the media, and the scientists are in on it. They're keeping information from you. And as a result of that belief in the conspiracy, we are eroding trust in institutions. In the very institutions that you need, for example, to combat a global pandemic that has taken the lives of tens of millions of people worldwide. To, for example, combat climate change that is an existential threat to our planet, and to have a democracy and a society. We don't trust the very institutions. And that's an important, if you learn nothing else from this talk, learn this, that conspiracies are not fun and games. It's not just that you believe something important that is scientifically invalid. It's that you are eroding trust in the basic institutions of society and democracy, and that, I would argue, is incredibly dangerous. Now, I was describing a couple of years ago when I started pivoting, as David very nicely said, from fake images and fake videos to disinformation more broadly, and we're going to talk about both today, to my postdoc advisor, my former postdoc advisor. And he said, Hany, don't work on this, it's hopeless. We're never going to solve this problem. And the reason he said it's hopeless is because on Facebook, there are 700,000 posts every minute from 3 billion worldwide users. On YouTube and TikTok, there are 500 hours of video uploaded every minute and about 350,000 tweets per minute on Twitter. That's insane. That is an insane amount of data, and you can't fact check yourself out of this. You just can't deal with that flood of information coming into an internet and being accessible to billions of people worldwide in something they're carrying around in their pocket and looking at significant amount of hours a day. It does seem, in fact, hopeless. But I wonder how hopeless it really is. So if you go to YouTube and watch this talk that I gave a few years back, you will notice something. You will notice a bunch of videos recommended to you on the side here. And if you have autoplay on, which by the way, you should turn off, it's a little evil. When you finish a video, it just starts another one, like Netflix. Yeah, just starts the next one, the next one, the next one. By the way, this is a non sequitur. My favorite quote from a tech CEO ever was the Netflix CEO asked, "Who's your biggest competitor?" And he said, "Sleep." That's pretty weird. He said it with a straight face, by the way, he wasn't joking. 70% of all videos watched on YouTube are recommended by YouTube, not organic. It's not that somebody sends you a YouTube link, you go watch the video and then you turn it off. You keep going and going and going. 70% are watched. Facebook, 100% of what you see is recommended. TikTok, 100%. Twitter, a significant amount that recommended, follow these people, follow these people. Social media is driven by algorithms that tell you what to watch next. To do what? To make you a more informed citizen? No. To make you smarter, more thoughtful, more decent? No. To keep your eyeballs on the platform for as long as humanly possible, to deliver ads to you, to get you to buy stuff that you don't need. That's the underlying business model of social media. And so we wondered that, is it really a problem of 500 hours of video uploaded every minute, or is it a different problem of what's being recommended to you, and then what's the nature of that? So, in some joint work with a MIM student here at the iSchool, Marc Fadul, and a colleague in France, we started watching what YouTube recommends to us. Over a 16-month period from October 18 to February 2020, just before the pandemic really hit hard, we probed YouTube's Watch Next algorithm. the algorithm that tells you what to watch next on that sidebar. And the way we did that is we simulated watching videos from around the world. So we had VPNs that sort of would hide our geolocation. And what we would do is we would simulate watching a video from 1,000 news-based channels, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we would bring up a video that they released on that day, simulate watching it, and then just watch to see what YouTube recommended to us, right? Big infrastructure to do this. I won't talk about the details of that. And then we collected 10 million recommendations over that 16-month period. And we were particularly interested to see what is the nature of what YouTube is recommending to us. Now, I'm adult enough and mature enough to realize not everybody sees the world that I see it. We don't all agree on what's true and what's fake. So what we did instead is we focused on conspiracies, because we thought conspiracies were a little bit less assailable. And by that conspiracy, I mean something that explains events as secret plots by powerful forces. That's the government is doing this, the aliens are doing it. Contradicts scientific consensus. Not that scientific consensus is always right, but it contradicts scientific consensus. It's not supported by any evidence other than I said so. And it's self-fulfilling or unfalsifiable, by which I mean most conspiracies, the way they work is you get data that either supports your belief or you get data that is evidence that there's a conspiracy because that person is part of the conspiracy. And that's, you can reasonably categorize a large number of things into this category, like moon landing, lizard people, and QAnon, and 5G, and chemtrails. And by the way, we're still arguing that. We're arguing about whether the Earth is flat or round, apparently. These are easy, relatively easy things to classify. So what we did is we were watching thousands and thousands of videos every day, and we had to classify them: conspiracy, not conspiracy, conspiracy, not conspiracy. So what we did is we built a classifier. So what we did is we took every video we watched, we translated it, we did audio to text to get what is being said. So that's the transcript over here. We got the snippets. This is the little abstract or the little extended title that the author creates for the video in addition to the title. And then the best part is we got the comments. What are people saying on the video? And if you spent any time on YouTube, you know the comments are awesome, but not in the good way. And we did some natural language processing, some simple machine learning. I won't go into the details of it, to learn what is the category of words and expressions being used to distinguish conspiratorial from scientific or news-based stories. I'm going to show you what the most descriptive words were. So in the comments, words that would illustrate or tell us that the video was conspiratorial were Illuminati, evil, research, deep hoax, global control, belief, autism, satanic. Here's my favorite one. They. Those people over there are doing this.
But not them.
Not them, they. Don't get confused. Here's my other favorite part. In the snippet that the author of the video creates, they just use the word conspiracy. They're not embarrassed. They're not trying to hide. They're not doing anything illegal. They believe it's a conspiracy and they just tell you. This is not hard to find, by the way. I was embarrassed when I saw that. I'm like, oh, hell, this isn't that hard to find. And then in the transcripts, information, NASA, weather, warming, evidence, climate, vaccines, ancient, and aluminum, which are parts of various types of conspiracies that you find online. And it turns out it's pretty easy to classify videos as conspiratorial when you have access to all this information. By far, the comments were the most descriptive in terms of predicting whether something was conspiratorial. Okay, so let's see what's happening. So now, over that 6-month period, we watch a video, we get a recommendation, we classify the video as conspiratorial or not, and we watch. November of 18 to February of 20, time on the horizontal axis. The vertical axis is what percentage of videos, again, on news-based channels. I'm not seeking out conspiratorial videos. I'm looking at something from CNN or MSNBC or Fox News, and what does YouTube recommend to me? At its peak, 10% of videos recommended, almost 10% were conspiratorial in nature. That is bonkers, 1 in 10. Remember, 70% of everything that's watched on YouTube is recommended to you, so that's a big number. Now, much to our good fortune, in January of 19, under pressure from the EU, under pressure from Australia, under pressure from Americans and advertisers, YouTube said, we are going to fight, they don't call it disinformation, they call it borderline content. That's a nice euphemism. We said, great. By the way, we were ready to stop the study right here. We're like, we've run it for a couple of months. The number's about 10%. Let's publish this and shame YouTube. And then they made an announcement like, all right, let's keep watching. Let's see what happens. Yeah, not much happened until summer of 19, June of 19. You saw this precipitous drop to about 3%. We thought, wow, that's really interesting. And it was really just very sharp and very constant. And I'm going to come back to that in a little bit, tell you what happened there. And then things sort of bounced around. And much to my regret, we didn't know the pandemic was coming when we stopped the study. Otherwise, we would have kept going. Because I think things got a little crazy after this. They've been bouncing around between, let's call it around 5%, 4 to 5%. But significantly better than close to 10%. Let's say they tackled about half the problem. So they did something. That's good. So you could say, well, okay, let's say it's 4%. Let's say it's 3%. Let's say it's 1%. Yeah, okay, 1% of the videos are conspiratorial. That's not too bad. But remember, this is why I'm getting recommended this after I've gone to look at a piece from CNN or MSNBC or Fox News or something like that. And so this actually hides a little bit of a different problem, which is what happens now when I watch a conspiratorial video. What happens next? So what happens when I click on one of those recommendations? Because that's the so-called rabbit hole that you hear about. So again, time on the horizontal axis, November of 18 to January of 20. Now what I'm going to show you is what percentage of videos are conspiratorial recommended after you've watched the conspiratorial video, one that we've classified. And in this initial gap in late 18, it was 70%. Watch one conspiracy video and you're down the rabbit hole. 70% of the next videos you're going to see are conspiracies, right? After watching one. In the gap where they said we're going to do something but didn't do anything, only 54%. And then after there was that action, that precipitous drop, down to 30%. This is the relevant number here. This means 1 in 3 chances after you watch conspiracy, you're going to get more conspiracy. And by the way, when you watch the second conspiracy, you're going to get even more and more and more. So this number starts going up. That's the rabbit hole. That is quantitative proof that YouTube, in fact, has a rabbit hole, despite the fact that they keep claiming that they do not. They absolutely do. They create rabbit holes. So let's go back here. And why am I telling you this story? So I started with disinformation is a problem for this country and for the world. It seems hopeless given the huge volume of data. And you hear this from the social media companies all the time. The internet's too big. There's nothing we can do. It is a big fat lie. And the reason why it's a lie is we got so lucky. We just so happened to be monitoring YouTube before intervention, and we monitored them after intervention, so we could ask, what was the intervention? The only thing that changed that we could measure was that 12 channels got demoted, not deplatformed. They just stopped getting recommended. Half, or a third actually, of their problem was solved by taking 12 channels and simply not recommending them. We can still find the videos if we search for them. That was a ballgame. Nothing fancy, nothing complicated, no AI, nothing. Just 12 crazy people stop promoting their videos. You still get to say whatever you want, but we're just not going to amplify you. And that was it. And that is not unique to YouTube. On Facebook, we know that 12 people, not our study, other studies have shown this, are responsible for half of all COVID-related disinformation, 12 people. 12 people are also responsible for half of global climate change denial on Facebook. I call it the pyramid of idiots. Mark Zuckerberg is at the very top. There's 12 people under him, and then there's everybody who keeps amplifying that over and over and over again. One person on Twitter, you know who it is responsible for election lies. The problem is highly, highly localized. The problem is that on social media, there's a relatively small number of people with massive influence. And we know this, they're the influencers. They have a phenomenal amount of power, and they're phenomenally profitable to the tech companies. So whether they're doing good or bad, they're getting amplified. And so that means the problem's not quite as hard as we thought it was. And you don't have to silence them. You don't have to deplatform them. Just have to stop amplifying them. There's a great line. It goes, you may have a right to speech, but you do not have a right to reach. You do not have a fundamental, first of all, you don't have a freedom of speech on the internet. The First Amendment protects you from the government, not from technology companies. Technology companies are free to allow you or not allow you to say whatever you want. The First Amendment doesn't apply here. And let's stop talking about this as if the First Amendment issue. It is not. But let's talk about the spirit of the First Amendment, the spirit of free expression. The spirit says, sure, you can say whatever you want, but you sure as hell don't have the right to say to Facebook, please amplify this to billions of users around the world. That is not a fundamental right. And so this problem is actually not that hard, but the problem is turning off these channels hurts profits. Yeah, and we saw this. Facebook did an experiment a few years back called Good for the World, Bad for the World. I can't believe they actually called it that. It took a couple 100,000 users and they asked them to rank everything that was in their newsfeed as good for the world, bad for the world. Very subjective, qualitative. Yeah, good for the world, bad for the world. Do it for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And then they retrained their algorithms to promote good for the world posts and demote bad for the world posts. And it worked. It was great. The post got nicer, less misinformation, less hate, less vitriol, less conspiracy. You know what else happened? People spent less time on Facebook. It wasn't as engaging. So what did Facebook do in the most dystopian thing ever? They literally turned off the algorithm called good for the world, and they turned on the algorithm called bad for the world. They know how to fix this, but it's bad for profits. And there's no pressure from the regulatory side to change, and so here we are. Okay. Now, ray of sunshine I am today. Take all of this and now inject deepfakes. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So if you haven't heard about deepfakes, deepfakes are the latest incarnation in manipulating images and video and audio to get people to say and do things that they never did. And we've seen examples of this actually happening in the real world. $35 million were stolen from a bank. This happened once in the UK in the last month and once in the UAE by impersonating a bank manager's voice. A deepfake of President Zelensky was created, having him say to his soldiers, "We're going to surrender, lay down your arms," and made that to Ukrainian national television and social media for hours before it was eventually taken down. And most recently, the FBI released a really interesting report saying that deepfake fraudsters are applying for jobs remotely in this post-COVID world-ish. We're still doing interviews on Zoom, and people are creating deepfakes, applying for jobs, getting their signing bonuses, and then never showing up to work. And this has become a huge problem. And so all of these things you are seeing, from disinformation to fraud, deepfakes are starting to play a role in, and we're going to talk a little bit about what they are and what you can do to counter them. So if you haven't seen a deepfake, here's one of my favorite ones. It's actually many years old. On the left, I'm going to play you a video of Jennifer Lawrence, and on the right, I'm going to show you a deepfake where her identity was replaced with Steve Buscemi. Look, I didn't make this. The internet is weird. This is the kind of thing the internet does. So, but it's pretty good. Watch it.
Expected Amy to win. So I just like, very, very truly surprising for me.
Oh, I think that was it. Sorry about that volume. Thanks, Eric. Okay, so you get the idea. Her identity was replaced, eyebrow to chin, cheek to cheek, with Steve Buscemi. Yeah, and it's now Steve Buscemi. And obviously this is meant to be fun. Nobody's meant to be fooled by this, but you can see the power of this. You can see how now somebody who's impersonating a president can make it look like the president, prime minister, is saying something that they never said. So how are these made? It's really quite elegant and quite remarkable. So here's the basic idea. What's a video? It's a bunch of frames. So let's just treat every frame or image separately. So I'm going to take the first frame of the video, and what do I want to do? I want to replace Jennifer Lawrence's face with Steve Buscemi. That's the generator's job. And it has help from a discriminator. So what it does is it takes a basic frame and it just sends it over to the discriminator. And the discriminator has access to a bunch of images of Steve Buscemi, just straight from the internet. And it says, is that Steve Buscemi? No, it's Jennifer Lawrence. I can tell the difference, right? Face recognition, super easy to do. So go back to the generator and say, nope, it's not Steve Buscemi. Please change something. It modifies some of the pixels in the image, sends it back to the discriminator, and it tries again and again and again, over and over and over. This is called a GAN, a generative adversarial network. Generative because it's making something. Adversarial because I've pitted two systems against each other, the forger and the detective. And network because the underlying computational machinery here and here in the generator discriminator are deep neural networks the machinery that is being used to fuel much of the AI ML revolution that we've been living through in the last few years. And it's a really simple idea. You basically pit two systems against each other and they do all the hard work. And all you have to do is provide the data here. And this is what's so powerful about deepfakes is you're not having to go into some sophisticated video editing or image editing software and make changes. You're just making the machine generate it for you. It's actually amazing. Yeah, and there's now websites that do this, there's apps that will do this. It's pretty easy to do this. There's a ton of GitHub repositories. You can just download this and run it on your laptop. It's amazingly powerful. We democratized access to Hollywood-style video editing. That's one of several types of deepfakes. Let me just mention the other ones. That's the face swap. The Puppet Master is amazing. It takes a single image of a person and then derives that person moving and talking and expressing from somebody standing in front of a webcam. So I can take a single image of Vladimir Putin and I can animate him saying anything that I want him to say. That's amazing. Lip sync deepfake says, take a video of, say, Mark Zuckerberg talking, replace his voice with a synthesized voice or impersonator, and then all you have to do is synthesize his mouth to be consistent with that new audio, right? Very powerful, very simple. And all of them are designed to do the same thing. Make it look like somebody is saying or doing something that in fact they didn't do. Okay? Super cool. Why are we worried about this? Well, the first problem we are having today already is non-consensual sexual imagery. People are using this weaponized against primarily women. Journalists, human rights activists, politicians, actresses, people who attract unwanted attention. Almost everybody has an image of themselves online. That image is being taken, inserted into sexual material, and then carpet bombing the internet with it, a form of weaponization against women. And there are dozens and dozens and dozens of websites and dozens of apps that will let you do this. It's awful. And it's impacting a lot of women around the world. I started this talk by talking about disinformation. I don't think you have to think too hard to see how these types of deepfakes can add jet fuel to disinformation campaigns, because now it's not, hey, on Twitter, I think Bill Gates is trying to put a tracking device in a vaccine. I'm going to create a video of him saying it. Yeah. Political campaigns, the midterms are among us. National elections are happening around the world. What happens when people start creating deep fakes of candidates, of politicians, saying and doing things? National security, we're constantly dealing with videos and images coming from around the world to reason about complex issues, including war. I already talked about the fraud, massive amount of fraud. If you thought phishing scams were bad now, just wait until it's not a text or an email, but you get a video call from your mom or your dad or your boss. Right now, we all got the scam saying, we just got them a couple of days ago. Professor Marty Hurst, email. Now you're going to get a video call from Marty telling you to do something. Don't do it, by the way. Never listen to Marty. Sorry, Marty. War. We saw it already being weaponized in the Ukraine, the new front. And here's the thing that really should keep you up at night, is the so-called liar's dividend. This is a great phrase from Danielle Citron at the University of Virginia. Liar's dividend, it goes like this. If we enter a world, which I would say we already are in, where anything you read, anything you see, anything you hear can be fake, nothing has to be real. You can deny reality. Yeah. There are many, many people out there who say that George Floyd was not killed by a police officer. Great, we don't have to talk about police violence. We don't have to talk about race in this country. It never happened. So what happens when we live in these parallel universes? When you believe X and I believe Y, and we're not debating approaches to solving a problem, we're debating 2 + 2 is equal to 38. Right? That is a real problem for society when we can't agree on basic facts. We can disagree on a lot of things, it's fine, but we can't disagree on facts. And this is going to make it easier and easier for us to disagree on facts, and that is very worrisome. So what do we do about this? So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're protecting some deepfakes, and I'm going to talk about the newest version of deepfake technology, so-called diffusion-based image synthesis, and some of the things we can do about that. So we have been focused on something very specific around deepfakes, which is world leaders, because we think that when you create a deepfake of a world leader, it is seriously problematic. I mean, assuming it's not for satire or humor or political distort, that's fine. I don't have any problem with that. And so what we've been doing, we've been focused on President Zelensky recently for obvious reasons. And what we have noticed, and this is the work that was started by Shuki Agarwal, who was a grad student with me here at Berkeley, now of course back at MIT, is that when we speak, we have a certain style of speaking. I tend to speak with my hands a lot. I tend, because I've been looking at videos of myself speaking because of this research, I tend to raise my right eyebrow more than my left eyebrow. I tend to lean forward when I want to emphasize something. And we all have this. And so what we do is we collect up a bunch of videos of President Zelensky speaking. That's actually really easy to do. Just go to his website. The presidential website in Ukraine has hours and hours of his speeches, tons of them. YouTube also has them. We download all the videos, and in the top row, what we do is we track his head motion and his facial expression. So how's he rotating his head? How's he raising his eyebrows? How's he frowning? And we look for patterns that distinguish his speaking style, his mannerisms from other people. And then at the same time, we track his upper body. This is all, by the way, pretty well solved problems. There's nothing really hard here. We can watch this, and particularly with politicians, because they're typically stationary. They're typically in a fixed background. And so it's actually pretty easy to segment from the background and track arm and hand motions. And then we look at their vocal patterns. This is a spectrogram of what his voice sounds like. And so, for example, when I'm talking like this and I turn my head, my voice changes a little bit, because of the way my throat is now sort of twisting a little bit. When I turn my head up a little bit, when I want to emphasize something, when I raise my hand to emphasize something, my voice gets louder. There are correlations. President Zelensky has this. When he lifts his left hand like this, he puts his head down a little bit. Right? He's got an asymmetric smile. His left side of the lip goes up a little bit more than the right side does. These quirky little things. So we look across facial, gestural, and vocal for correlations of how somebody speaks that distinguishes them from other people, right? A type of biometric, if you will. And we can't rely on the face because that's the thing that's getting swapped out, right? The face is no good anymore. We can't do biometrics on faces. So here's what we did. This is a beautiful work of Matyas Kohatchik, a student in the Czech Republic. We collected 8 hours of video of President Zelensky in 4 different settings, both pre-war and during the war. And we ran our analysis. We ran every single video. We actually break them up into these little 10-second segments. It's all we need is about 10 seconds to capture some of these mannerisms. And we build this behavioral model for him. And then any video comes in, we just ask, are the behaviors the same? And let me just show you, without going into all the details of how the model works, the accuracy. So there's 3 curves here. You can ignore all but the orange one. This is the result of what's called an ablation study. The full model, the full behavior model has 780 parameters, okay, right here. And so we ask, well, if we only had 10 parameters, how well do we do? If we had 50 parameters, 100 parameters, 20 parameters, 40 parameters, 400 parameters, 600 parameters. It's called the ablation study because you want to make sure that you really do need these parameters. But if I could get to 100% accurate with 10, I'm overcommitted here. I'm doing something I don't need to do. And you can see this orange curve says that 99.9% of the time, we correctly classify a real Zelensky video as real. That's called the true positive rate. So 1 in 1,000 false alarm rate on a 10-second segment of a real Zelensky. The other curves are for different true positive rates. And by the time we get to 400, we are catching 99.9% of the fakes. And by the time we get to 600, and then eventually 780, 100%. Not a single deep fake escapes us. It's a very, very rich model that captures very specific mannerisms. And we have tested this against other world leaders, against deepfakes that are found in the wild, and deepfakes that we commissioned. We got professional deepfakers to create deepfakes for us. We told them what we were trying to do, make the best deepfake we can. We have no problem detecting it. It's awesome, really beautiful work from our lab. So let me just stop there for a second. So the good news here is we think we can actually protect world leaders from deepfakes. The bad news is that's a relatively small number of people, right? Probably less than 100, because it's a little bit of work. We've got to get about 8 hours of video, first of all. We think we can get away with about 4, but we like to have more. So you have to have somebody who talks a lot, politicians, professors. And it's a lot of work to do this. And so it's good for world leaders, but it doesn't help us with non-consensual sexual imagery. I can't protect, 4 billion women in the world? So it helps with some things, it doesn't help with other things. Our view of this is one step at a time. Now, there's a new player on the scene It just came out recently. If you haven't heard about it, it's really amazing. So this is called Paint by Text. OpenAI has a version of it called DALL-E, and there's another version of it called Stable Diffusion, and there's a couple other versions of it. And we're going to talk about that in a minute, but I want to sort of preface this by saying that full-blown synthesis, we've been talking about video, of audio and text and images you're going to see in a minute has gotten very good. So this is an amazing demo I'm going to play for you in a little bit, and here's how it goes. GPT-3 is OpenAI's natural language processing engine. And the way it works, and by the way, this should terrify professors and teachers, because the way it works is you give it a prompt, a Jerry Seinfeld routine about cats, and it will write an essay for you. So when your professor gives you an assignment, you can go home and type in, Professor Farid wants an essay about blah, and it will write an essay for you, and it's pretty good. So what OpenAI did is they generated a script with the prompt, a Jerry Seinfeld routine about cats, and then they synthesized the reading of that script in Jerry Seinfeld's voice. So everything you're about to see has nothing to do with Jerry Seinfeld, except they typed in the word Jerry Seinfeld. Okay, so it's pretty long. I'm just going to play a little bit of it to give you a sense of it.
Why does it seem like every time you're watching TV, there's a commercial for a new brand of cat food? And it's always some kind of crazy new flavor, like tuna and salmon surprise, or chicken and liver delight. I don't need a new flavor of cat food every other week. Just tell me what was so bad about the old ones. They were great.
By the way, it keeps going, and it's surprisingly funny. And I don't know if it's funny because it was OpenAI, but first of all, the voice and the cadence is pretty good. And even the theme is pretty good. He's talking about cat food. It's like a perfect Jerry Seinfeld thing. Had nothing to do with Jerry Seinfeld. That's amazing. The voice is amazing. The text generated. And by the way, not only is it coherent text, it's coherent text in the style of Jerry Seinfeld. So it was trained on all the Jerry Seinfeld things. That is a remarkable success for machine learning and AI, natural language processing, and speech synthesis. Truly amazing. So now we've got speech, audio, fully synthesized. We've got video. Let's do images next. So if you haven't seen, oh, those are the closed captions. That's me talking. Oh crap, that's going to show up. Okay, if you haven't seen, I just noticed that. If you haven't seen OpenAI's DALL-E, it's amazing. So you go to the website, if you get an account, and you just type in what you want. A photo of teddy bears working on new AI research on the moon in the 1980s, and it will generate that image for you. And first of all, there's a lot of things that are awesome about this image. The most awesome thing is those computers look, they were like from the 1980s. How did it know how to do that? That's incredible. A hip hop cow in a denim jacket recording a hit single in the studio. This is not cobbling together images that's seen before. It can't be. Here's my favorite one. Oh, I can't see it. Hold on, I'll read it to you. A medieval painting of the Wi-Fi not working. I mean, isn't that perfect? Wi-Fi. It's as if you're on the Berkeley campus. That's amazing. So not only is it able to synthesize images, but it understands language. This is semantically accurate. This is not just make an image of a face that looks statistically like a bunch of other faces. This means you have semantic understanding. Yeah. And the basic idea of how this works is that prior to this work, OpenAI and others, GPT-3 have done what's called auto captioning. So you give it an image and it gives you the text. But once you have that, well, then the reversing is not actually that hard. And so the diffusion process is take a text and then move through some latent space efficiently to generate an image that's consistent with the text, essentially reversing the auto captioning. And you can dig into the deepest, most bizarre recesses of your brain, and it will generate really, eerily relevant images and highly, highly realistic. Interestingly, by the way, when OpenAI developed this, they put guardrails. You couldn't put proper names. You couldn't put the president's name. You couldn't say murder. You couldn't say sex. You couldn't say nudity. And then the folks at Stable Diffusion came along, another company, and said, yeah, we don't need guardrails. Everything will be fine. And so they open sourced their entire software and said, do whatever you want. What could possibly go wrong? And so when this came out, David said very nicely, I'm in the business of trying to determine if images are real or not. And I wanted to just give you a sneak peek into some of the things we've been thinking about, because we predict that these images are going to hit the scene hard and fast, because this technology is coming really, really fast. Okay. So to tell you, one of the things I was most curious about is when I look at the images, they seem to really capture something, but they're not photographic in nature. And I was curious about whether these images respected the physics of the world around us. So to tell you about the analysis, I got to tell you a little bit about physics. So let's do that now. These are real images. Actually, they're computer-generated images, but they're physically rendered. So they obey the physics of the world. And if you know, if you've ever seen a photograph of, for example, railroad tracks, they recede into the horizon, a vanishing point. Right? So on this image on the left, there's a tiled floor. And what I've drawn are blue lines that are along the parallel tiles in the image. And what you notice is that they all converge to a single point in the top right. That is a vanishing point. Artists have known this for an awful long time. Yeah. So if you have parallel lines in the world, and you take an image of that, they will converge to a single point. That is the physics of perspective projection at a single point. Interestingly, by the way, if you have parallel lines on parallel planes, so notice the top of the box here is parallel to the lines here, they share the same vanishing point. So if I have two planes that are parallel and the lines are parallel, they all have the same vanishing point. That's super cool and not at all immediately obvious. All right, so that's fact number one about vanishing points. Fact number two about vanishing points. If I take vanishing points, the ones I showed you a second ago, they converge to that same blue dot in the top right. Different set of parallel lines. Let's go this way now. They have a vanishing point that goes to the top left. And then here's another one on this box here that's oblique to the floor. They have another vanishing point. So all different vanishing points because those lines are themselves parallel, but also different from each other. Notice that all those points lie on a single line. That's called the vanishing line. Basic fundamental physics, all structures imaged with a camera will follow this basic geometry. That's cool. That's a nice forensic analysis that we can do. Fact number one. Fact number two about the physics of images. This is an image of a crate being imaged with a light above, and you see a cast shadow below. What I've drawn is I've drawn a line between points on the cast shadow, corresponding points on the object, the crate, and I've extended it upwards. And what do you notice? Ah, those look familiar. They intersect at a single point. Those are basically a different version of vanishing point and vanishing geometry. So take an object with a cast shadow, draw corresponding points between shadow and object. They will all have to, if it's physically correct, intersect at a single point. Fact number three, I guess. Let's think about reflections and mirrored surfaces. This orange line in the middle is a mirrored surface. These are three cubes in front of the mirrored surface, and these are the virtual cubes on equidistant. If you dig back to your high school physics, you will remember this. So what I've drawn is I've drawn lines corresponding to points on the objects and their corresponding reflection. If I look at that mirrored surface from the top, that's not a view I can actually take, those lines will all be parallel. That's the nature of reflections. Now, if I move back into the room and take a picture, what happens? Here again, I've drawn lines between corresponding points on the object and the reflections. They all intersect at a single point. It's a reflection-based vanishing point. So geometry, parallel structures, shadows, and reflections all share a common geometry. And that's really cool. Right? All I got to do is draw lines, and I can tell if these things are physically consistent. Okay, done. Now let's see how Stable Diffusion and OpenAI does. One of the great things about OpenAI is I can go to OpenAI and say, please give me 100 images of a kitchen with a tiled floor. And it'll give me 100 random images with a kitchen with a tiled floor. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask, is this perspectively correct? Did you respect the physics? And the answer is sort of. So let's look. Here's a tiled floor. 1, 2, 3 lines along the parallel. Single vanishing point off to the right. Those are correct. That's amazing. 1, 2, 3 going in the other direction. Single vanishing point. That's amazing. Yeah. There's the vanishing line, the red connecting those two. So if we just stop there, this image is physically correct. But now something is going to go a little wrong. That countertop is parallel to these lines right here. It should share the same vanishing point, or at least be on the vanishing line, and it is not. So this image are locally consistent, but globally inconsistent. So here, for example, this is amazing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all converge to a single vanishing point. It got the geometry right. It doesn't know anything about geometry, by the way. It's amazing how it is. But then here's another set of parallel lines, different plane. It should share the same vanishing point. It does not. Locally consistent, globally inconsistent. That gives me a little bit of hope for my side of the aisle. Okay, let's go to shadows. So first of all, respect to DALL-E because it knows about basic imaging. The 3 images on the top are the response to a prompt that says, please give me a photo of 3 cubes on a sidewalk on a cloudy day. And on the bottom is 3 cubes on the sidewalk on a sunny day. So it knows that on the cloudy day, there's no shadows, and it knows that on the sunny day, there are shadows. And that's super cool. That's amazing. I didn't actually expect that, but it works pretty well. But now the question is, are the shadows physically correct? Well, let's see. So often things go a little weirder. So here, for example, we've gone a little crazy in the top right. This shadows and the middle and the top has gone a little weird in the corner. Top left, they seem to be detached. Bottom left is detached. Bottom right is pure failure state. I don't know what happened over here. There's just shadows just hanging out for no reason whatsoever. So every once in a while, it does just the shadows are just wrong. It knows there should be a shadow, but they're just like shadow object, right? Not connecting them properly. But just as often, it actually gets them sort of correct. So here are 3 images that I converted to grayscale so you can see them, and I've rotated them so I can put them all in the one slide. And again, connect up, points on the shadow with points on the object, they intersect at a single point. But the other cube has a different connection. So again, locally consistent, but globally inconsistent. It got the single shadow right, but it doesn't know about the other shadows. The same way with the geometry. Same thing here, same thing here. I didn't find a single image out of the hundreds that I analyzed that actually got all the shadows consistent across the image. Some more good news for me. This is where it gets really fun. Reflections. So this is the result of a prompt of a toy dinosaur in front of a small mirror. And here, DALL-E really struggles with physics. Because in the top left, when you look in the mirror, do you see the back of your head? That would be cool, by the way. I'd like to see that mirror. So here you can see top left, top right, top middle, top right. There's a reflection that sort of looks like it belongs to the object, but the physics are completely wrong. Bottom left, I don't know what's going on. It's like, by the way, it got the reflection on the bottom right, but it's just, its head is like in the mirror. There's like a mirror inside the mirror. I don't know what happened there. And this one's a little weird. I have one, and I forgot to put it in. It's fantastic. It's a little toy pink dinosaur outside and a T-Rex in the reflection, which I just thought was awesome, like a little metaphor for life. So it really, really struggles with the reflection. It was really hard to get anything that even looked like it might be a reflection. But every once in a while, it sort of get it right. So these 2 images, top and bottom, are, you can sort of look at that and be like, oh, that could be the reflection. But again, when you draw those lines, point on the object, point on the reflection, it's all over the place. There's no common intersection. So the reflections, the physics of reflections, it is really, really struggling with. All right, we're supposed to stop at 5, right, David? Yes. Okay, I'm gonna skip the lighting stuff, although it's really cool. Okay, so the good news, so the bad news is the videos and the audio and the text are really, really good. David made mention to it in the introduction, and we have done some perceptual studies that show that synthesized faces cannot be distinguished from real faces. It's over. We've gone through the uncanny valley. Videos are somewhere in between. These synthesized images that I described to you are perceptually good, but physically and geometrically have problems. I imagine it's just a matter of time before they start fixing some of these problems, as we have seen in the past. I started this talk by talking about disinformation. It's been a long journey to deepfakes, but all of these things are related. And we are worried about manipulating reality, whether that's in the form of simply lying, or whether that's in the form of manipulating images or video or audios of people saying and doing things they never did. There are many challenges among us, ahead of us. The space of deep learning and AI is developing at a speed that I don't think we've ever seen before. Certainly not the previous revolutions in AI. It is an unbelievably fast and exciting space, but it means our job is much, much harder. We were just getting our heads around deepfakes when diffusion came around, and we're like, oh man, now we got to deal with this. Not only can you create all the lies and the conspiracies and the insanity, but you can spread it at a scale and a speed on social media that is unprecedented. So it's not just that you can create this stuff, but you can deliver it to billions of people around the world instantaneously, and that makes the challenge very difficult. The half-life of a social media post is measured in minutes, not hours or days. We have a highly polarized public, not just here in the US, but around the world, which means when the lies and the conspiracy reach them, they are not just willing, they are eager to believe and to spread and to fan the lies. I've already talked about the lies dividend, and fundamental to what I do is an arms race. Every time we develop technology, somebody develops a better faith. And we develop better technology, just like everything in cybersecurity. That's the way it goes. Yeah. I think there are some interventions that we should think about. I think people who are in the ML and AI space should think about whether they should be developing technology that allows it to be so easy to manipulate what a president says. And if they do, maybe they should think whether they should just put that in a GitHub repository and sit back and say, well, let's see what happens next. I think we should think about not just can we do something, but should we do something? And while physicists and chemists and biologists have had to deal with the consequences of horrific death and destruction because of their inventions, I don't think we computer scientists have had that day of reckoning in the same poignant way. But I would argue that technology is just as much a threat to society as it is an advantage, and I think we should think about that. We need better technology. We need regulation. I hate to say it because I don't think our regulators know what they're doing, but we need to start thinking about how to regulate the tech industry. And we can spend a whole nother hour talking about that. And since we're at a university here, we should talk about education. We should talk about how to inform the next generation to get trusted information online and to be a better person online. These are the people who worked on the, oh wait, those aren't the right people. Those are all synthetically generated people. These are the right people. Shruti Agarwal, PhD student here, now postdoc at MIT, did all the deepfake stuff. Matthias Kohaczek, a spectacularly talented young man in the Czech Republic, worked on the Zelensky and some of the diffusion stuff. Mark did all the work on the YouTube, and Sophie did a lot of the work on the disinformation. Mark is now back in France. Sophie is a professor at University of Lancaster, and really remarkable team that did all the work here. I think that's it. Thanks, everybody.
All right, so we have about 30 minutes or so for questions. So if you're online, feel free to put the questions in the Q&A right now. If you're in the room, go ahead and raise your hand and Hany can field.
I'm going to give the first question to somebody in the Q&A because it's Rujana Baichi, who was my former lab director when I was a grad student, and I don't screw around when Rujana asks me a question. Hi, Rujana. Rujana asked, how do you define conspiratorial? And so the way we define conspiratorial is I enumerated those 4 things. So let me just bring it back up here. And this is not perfect, by the way, but it's actually not that hard for the moon landing and the QAnon. So it explains events as secret plots by powerful forces. It contradicts scientific consensus. It's not supported by evidence and is self-fulfilling or unfalsifiable. Reasonable definition that reasonable people can agree on. And then Rujana asks, do you think that the bad things can be stopped? On a good day, I would say maybe, and on a bad day, I would say no. I don't know if we crossed the tipping point yet. It's sort of like climate change. At some point, it's going to be too late. And at some point, what I mean by too late here is if we get to this point where the conspiracies take such root, then people will not trust governments, media, and scientists, the exact people you need to fix the problem. So by chipping away at the institutions that we need to trust, at some point, we will have crossed through the ability to undo this. And I don't know if we are there yet, but I don't think we have a lot of time. And I think we better get our act together. Thanks, Rujana. Okay, we're going to take questions in the room. Yes, please.
You know, the pedigree of this line of thinking, I love talking. I'm just thinking about how it applies to other things in social science.
Sure.
The pedigree of this kind of thinking goes way back. where do the key ideas of any age come from? And what sort of corrective or corrective therapies might they ever be susceptible to?
Yeah.
This is a question that I think is central to what people are asking. If you think of the major world religions and the empirically relevant parts of their doctrines, I'm not going to name any religions here because I don't want to get in trouble with anybody else in the audience, but this remark applies to almost any of them. Many of them have fantastical elements.
Yeah.
Some would say all
Yeah.
of the major world faiths
Yeah.
in their empirical accounts of
Yeah.
where we are and who we are and what we're doing have miracles, and these miracles are often associated with authoritative claims on behalf of these faiths. So one might say, and we tend to like to think of ourselves as human beings as searchers for consistency, but we've gotten along with massive inconsistencies over a very long historical period. So this is not a question, I'm just adding, I hope, to the.
Yeah, so let me say, I don't disagree with anything you said. And I'd be the first person to say is that disinformation and deep fakes, the nature of that are not new. From the printing press, to radio, to television, we have had disinformation campaigns, right? I would argue, however, this is qualitatively different for the following reason. First of all, we have over 3 billion people that are connected to the same communication device, right? We've democratized access to the printing press, to radio, and to television. Many good things have come from that, but also now anybody can start the QAnon conspiracy, a world religion, right? So we've democratized access to that and we've given a megaphone. But here's the real problem. Here's the real difference from the previous instantiations of this, is that the internet does not favor thoughtful, honest, decent, serious thought. It favors outrage, hate, anger, and conspiracy. Why? Because that's what we respond to. And so the problem is, Brandeis had this great line: the best response to false speech is more speech, not less. He was right. But that works only when you have a fair marketplace of ideas, when the good idea and the bad idea can compete equally. But they don't, because Mark Zuckerberg has his big fat thumb on the scale, and he favors outrage and conspiracies and lies. So when people say 5G causes COVID, that gets more play than Dr. Fauci saying, wear a goddamn mask, you idiot. Right? And that you can't, that's new. That ability to amplify the most outrageous and hateful and to target that to an individual, right? Say what you will about news, radio, and television. What you saw and what I saw 20, 30 years ago was the same thing. May not have been great, but we saw the same thing. Now, when you go to Facebook, I don't go to Facebook. When you go to any social media or go to Google, you see something completely different. We don't have a shared factual system anymore. And I would argue that is qualitatively different. And I think that's a huge part of the threat. And let me add one more thing. We strap this stupid thing to our face 18 hours a day. So we're doom scrolling through this stuff hours and hours on end, which you can't really say about the printing press and radio. So I think all of those things combine to paint a different picture. I agree with you. We have been here before in form, but I think the structure of this and the devastation that it's causing. And this isn't, I'm not being hysterical. I mean, look at what happened in Myanmar. Some of the worst human rights violations being fueled by WhatsApp and Facebook. Look at the Philippines. Look at Ethiopia, Sri Lanka, interventions in Brazil and democracy. I mean, really, true awful things are happening. And so, to me, that's a very different threat than some of the things we've seen before. But I don't fundamentally disagree with the premise of what you're saying. Yes, please.
On the topic of what you consider conspiracies, I guess I'm curious to know how you think about if specific communities are more susceptible to accept like some conspiracies over others.
Good. So the question was, are some people more susceptible to conspiracies over others? So I'm going to speak about misinformation around COVID because I don't have the answer to this. So one of the things that Sophie and I did at the sort of in the middle of COVID is we ran worldwide surveys here in the US, Central and South America, Northern Africa and the Middle East, and Western Europe, asking people a fixed set of questions about COVID knowledge and the belief in, some of them were conspiracies, but some were misinformation. Much to our surprise, we found no correlation from gender, race, age, country, for that matter. The only thing we found was that here in the US, and only here in the US, was political affiliation. If you are on the right part of the spectrum, you are more likely to believe the misinformation than the left by a lot. But worldwide, it's all over. Oh, an education level had nothing to do with it. It's not about smart or not smart. It's really surprising. And I'm not a social scientist. So I'm not exactly the right person to ask this. There are people much more informed about this. But we were really surprised that we found no demographic, age, education, and only politics in the US were relevant to this. There are people, serious people who study conspiracies and what is that leads people down that path. I've read a little of this literature, but I'm not an expert enough to talk about it, but there is a literature on this about what leads people down there. And the biggest thing is skepticism and a lack of trust in institutions. That's like the trigger, right? You are skeptical of authority, you don't trust authority, and then it's very easy to go down a rabbit hole because of the manipulations that are happening. But I don't know other than that if there are particular demographics that fall into the QAnon. It doesn't look that way from my view, but I think you have to talk to somebody who's more of an expert. Please.
Aside from the survey, aside from asking people within the data itself, was there like any reference to, for example, in the Black community, referring to Tuskegee experiment?
Yeah, good. So this is such a great question. So the question is, did you find anything in the data among the Black community that would explain why they were doing it? So we didn't ask why they believe them, so the answer is no. But here's an interesting point, and I think this is worth making, is that one of the reasons why conspiracies hold is because the government has done really bad things. And it's done really bad things, in fact, continues to do bad things against people of color. And so you can see why the Black community, when the COVID vaccine came out, would be like, yeah, we've been here before, maybe not so much. And so I don't actually blame people in the Black community to be skeptical of the government. We have done awful things, or for example, the Native American communities. So that's the problem with these conspiracies. The government has lied to us. They have done awful things to its citizens here and abroad. And so when these things happen, I'm not actually blaming people who believe the conspiracies. Now, I think when 1 million people in the US die, we got to start paying attention to that, and tens of millions of people. But generally speaking, I think a certain amount of skepticism about the government is good. But I think at some point when we're trying to tackle climate change or COVID, we've got to band together and take it seriously. And if the ask is please wear a mask, even more so, I think that's not asking for a lot. But I think it's a great question within certain demographics. You know, are they more susceptible and why it is? I haven't done that research. I think it's a fascinating question to ask. Yeah.
All right, so I've got a question of my own that also reflects one of the questions that's coming in online. I'd love you to talk a little bit more about the arms race that you described in the very last slide, because I think this is really interesting from the perspective of GANs.
Yeah.
Right? Because like the original way in which GANs are trained for many problems is to try to discriminate between a real image and a fake image.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a sense here in which this confusability is being operationalized by a lot of these models. So can you talk first just about what this arms race is?
Good.
And if you've also seen any examples of your own work detecting fake images, then leading to other people generating fake images.
Good. Good. So let's talk about the arms race. So first of all, here's an example of how I could fuel the arms race. So if my classifier was just a machine learning algorithm that ingested a single frame and predicted whether that frame of the video was fake or not, well, then you would just take that classifier and shove it into the discriminator, and done, you're going to fool me. But that's not what we did. And that's not an accident, by the way. We were very thoughtful that, oh, if we do something that looks a lot like a discriminator, we're just going to make a better discriminator. So first of all, the way we are right now dealing with the arms race is we look at 300 frames at a time, 10 seconds of video. Synthesizers can only do 1 or 2 frames at a time because of the computational load. So right out of the gate, we have a huge temporal advantage, number one. Number two is that we are looking at things like head movements and expressions, how you raise your eyebrow, your hands, and your voice. And the GANs don't know anything about it. They're pushing around pixels. They have just this low-level representation. They don't even know there's a face in there. They know nothing. But we have this sort of mid to high level semantic understanding that is outside of the reach of the GANs. That's number two. And here's the big one. We don't release our models. We publish them, of course, but we don't release the models. And the reason we don't release the model is even though we have an advantage right now because of the semantic understanding and the temporal component, we are concerned that somebody could just take a video and just pump it through our thing and get a sense of whether it will be flagged or not. And we don't want them doing that. So we will share the model with researchers who we know. We are working with the Ukrainians. We will work with governments that are legitimately trying to decipher real from fake, but otherwise we keep it fairly tight. I don't know that that's the best solution. It is just a matter of time before we start getting spoofed, but that's okay. That's the way the cybersecurity works. And we will go on to the next thing. Oh, here's number four. I know some things I'm not telling you. We have holdbacks. They don't involve students. I think students should publish their work, but I work on some things on my own and I just hold them back and I don't publish them and I don't tell anybody about them. And I hold on to them for a couple of years and then we'll push them out there and then we'll have another holdback. So there's constantly this little bit of holdback that helps us a little bit. Yeah.
Do you feel like there's any relationship between social isolation and the willingness to believe in a conspiracy and therefore feed into that narrative?
So the question is there any relationship between social isolation and belief in conspiracy? Again, I'm not a social scientist, I'm not a psychologist or a pathologist, I don't really know. I think that we did, here's what I can tell you, we saw a huge uptick in the belief in conspiracies during COVID. I think that was probably a couple of things. First of all, it was insane 2 years, it was unprecedented. We were scared and we were sitting at home doom scrolling for 18 hours a day. Sure, that had to have an impact. I can't believe it doesn't. So I think isolation does, I think fear does. I think whenever there is an event, the president is assassinated, planes crash, things that are 9/11, things that are hard to get your head around, people want an explanation. And the simple explanation is, a bunch of crazy people flew planes into an airplane doesn't work, right? Or a lone gunman shot the president. It doesn't work. It can't be that. And so people are seeking something. So I think that is a very natural tendency. And I would imagine, although again, not being an expert in this, is that isolation and fear probably, and by the way, that rabbit hole effect that we talked about probably are a big contributor to these. And we have seen a massive uptick in belief in conspiracies from 5G to QAnon to Flat Earth in a way that we have not. It's always been around single digits, but now it's double digits and that's very different. Yes, sir.
I'm curious to understand how regulators are thinking about this.
Right.
Specifically, whose prerogative do they think it is to be able to detect not just disinformation, but deepfakes?
Yeah. So the question is, how are regulators thinking about this? Well, the US regulators aren't thinking at all about it because, it's complete chaos on Capitol Hill. The Europeans are doing better. In Brussels, two pieces of legislation have come out called the DMA and the DSA. The DMA is going after antitrust, trying to create a healthier ecosystem for smaller companies to emerge and do better. And the DSA is going after the online safety thing, everything from child sexual abuse to terrorism to misinformation to deepfakes. So here's the way I think they're thinking about it. Oh, and sorry, I should also say that the Brits, the UK, despite the chaos in the UK, are also working on an online safety bill that is good, and the Australians have also been very, very good on this. Here's, coming out of the UK, Australia, and Brussels, is this language that I like, which is called a duty of care. And I really like this language. It says, if you build a product, and the fact that the product is digital shouldn't matter, you have a responsibility for harm that comes from it. And by the way, that is 100% true in the physical world, right? If you build a car that is faulty and you knew it was faulty, you should have known, we're gonna sue you and you're gonna have to fix the car. But you can't say that about the internet. And I think for a long time, we thought the internet was Las Vegas. What happens on the internet stays on the internet, so who cares? It's the internet. And not so much anymore. There is no more online and offline world, by the way. It's one world now. So this idea, see, Facebook will have you believe that they're like a telephone wire. Look, we just get stuff from here and stuff from here, and we just put it on the internet, and what happened, bad stuff happened. But that's not how it works. 100% of what you see on Facebook is recommended by Facebook. What do? They reach into that 700,000 posts per minute. They select something for you. They slap an ad on it and give it to you and say, not our responsibility. I don't think that's reasonable. I think if it was truly the wire, where you just, things get there and you go find stuff, you can have a reasonable argument that they're just posting material, but that's not how they work. And I think the regulators are onto that. That if you have enough intelligence and can monetize to the tune of trillions of dollars, delivering content very specifically, you're going to own that content. You have a responsibility. And by the way, the offline media has responsibility. You can sue the New York Times, you can sue the Washington Post if they say something defamatory or libelous, but you can't do that too. Silicon Valley. So I think that's the way to think about it, is that you have a duty of care. And then when your platform is being used to inflict horrific harm on children in the form of child sexual abuse, or to allow terrorists to plan and execute and broadcast horrific violence, or to run disinformation campaigns designed to disrupt the democracy, we're going to hold you accountable. And here's what's going to happen. As soon as we can start finding and suing these companies to the billions of dollars, they're going to turn the algorithm back on that's good for the world. And we know this. And we know this in the physical world. When the liability laws allowed car companies to say, let them die, we'll settle the lawsuit because the lawsuits weren't that bad, products were unsafe. And as soon as we had tort reform and allowed people to gain court, well, guess what? Everything got safer. The products got safer. Food got safer. Flying got safer. Cars got safer. Pharmaceuticals got safer. So I think that's the trend. And I like that trend. You just have a responsibility to make sure you're not destroying the world. I actually don't think it's actually asking that much, especially for $1 trillion industry. Knock it off. It's not fun and games anymore.
When we talk about restoring trust in the scientific community or government, we like, we are doing enough. Sometimes we make suboptimal solutions at given time because maybe we don't know well. And in the future, we don't go back and reflect on that as much. For example, during COVID time, I don't know how it was here, but I was in Nepal. And there we were running out of masks because in the market because it wasn't prepared for it. And one of the suggestions that I was hearing from many people, including some of my friends who are in medical school, was that don't buy masks because technically there were a lack of masks in even for other things in hospitals and all. So their suggestion was, but this doesn't really prevent you from COVID because virus is so tiny, all these sort of things. But it turns out now mask is probably the most important thing, right?
Yeah.
But I didn't hear the story. I didn't see the story from those people saying that, okay, we made the suboptimal solution at that point. But based on what we now know, I don't see the acknowledgement that we made suboptimal solution in the past. So that kind of fuels, I think, why people are not trusting scientific community as much.
Yeah, good. So let me rephrase the question if I can, which will give me time to think of an answer. So your question is, look, we don't always know what the right answer is. And certainly in the early days of COVID, there's a lot we didn't know. And that's why I think misinformation is a tricky space. And it's why, by the way, in our studies, we focus on conspiracies, which are qualitatively different than, oh God, we're in the middle of a global pandemic and we didn't know that it was airborne. We thought, we had to microwave our mail for the first 3 months because we didn't know, right? And so I agree with you. But I would also argue that COVID was that was an edge case. When you are looking at misinformation around, for example, elections, there's no confusion here, right? The election wasn't stolen in the US. When you're looking at misinformation around lying about candidates, there's no confusion here. So I agree that there is this sliver of content where, look, there's just uncertainty here. And we should tread lightly here about saying, what should be allowed and what should not be allowed. And I think in some cases in social media, we went too far in eliminating things. In some cases, we didn't go far enough. But I would argue that probably the once in a lifetime, hopefully global pandemic that we've lived through is probably a one-off case. And I think the vast majority of things we're talking about online are not quite as complicated as that. But I agree with you. We don't always know at a given instance where we are. And I think that's fair enough. Yes.
Thinking about your solution or part of your solution of holding back the algorithms, holding back the work that you do. I like the feeling, okay, great, if this is in the hands of the responsible people that I trust.
Well, I don't know if I'm responsible, but thank you.
But the side part comes to mind of, okay, so who's going to have access to this? Maybe the Googles and the Facebook and the people that we don't trust.
Yeah.
So maybe opening it up and the whole idea of open source being everybody has access so we can all use it. That's the other side of the picture.
Yeah. Okay, good. So the question is, you said you've got some holdbacks and maybe you're responsible, but what if it's Google holding it back or Facebook holding it back or a nefarious actor holding it back? And what if I'm actually a nefarious actor So why not just open source everything and at least we can trust everything? I have to tell you, I struggle with this all the time, and I don't know if I got it right. I really don't. My problem with open source is that when you are on my side of the aisle, putting it all out there, I think is going to cause more damage than good on balance. I could be wrong about it, and by the way, we think about this constantly. We're constantly revisiting our decisions about whether this is the right thing to do. But I'll give you an example of why I think open source isn't always the right thing. I have a colleague here on the UC Berkeley campus who developed some very cool machine learning technology to manipulate images. And he put it on a GitHub repository, open source, no restrictions, do whatever you want with it. First thing that happened is somebody took it and made an app to make non-consensual sexual imagery so they can take an image of a woman and re-render her without clothes. Any image on the internet. Is open source great now? I don't know, that's pretty bad. That's bad. So, you know, I am all for open source, but we are in a realm now that is not Linux, open source Linux OS, right? This is a very different world because this technology can be weaponized. Here's another way to think about it. If I'm a biologist and I figure out how to create a deadly virus out of the ingredients in my kitchen, do you think I should open source it? Should I just put the recipe on the internet and be like, all right, let's see what happens next? That doesn't sound right. And I'm not equating deepfakes with a deadly virus, but not everything, it's not always great to have everybody have everything, right? So this is, it's a struggle. And I think reasonable people can disagree here. This is sort of where we've landed. It feels like it's working for us. By the way, we do share it with other researchers. We want to push research forward. We do share it with certain governments. We do share it with certain media outlets. I work with these organizations all the time to try to help them to reason about a very complex world. I don't think it's a great solution, but I don't have a better one. And if somebody does, come tell me.
The open sourcing of the being able to tell whether the Russian government is putting out a deep fake that we, you know, is that part of, is there a open sourcing of the tools that we, people that can be.
Yeah, but the problem is, if I open source the tool to detect the fakes, everybody gets it. The Russians get it. So then I make better fakes, which was David's question, right? So that's tricky, yeah? Yes, please.
It's a follow-up on that. You just, you had one quote that really inspired me. You said that biologists and chemists and physicists already had to deal with wicked consequences.
Yeah.
I am not aware of an action having done this. I am not aware of a solution that teaches biologists, physicists to make ethical decisions of the kind that you have to make every day. If you are aware that these disciplines are further ahead than we were, that would be great.
Yeah.
But I don't think they are.
Yeah. So the question is, I said physicists, chemists, and biologists have had to deal with the consequences, and your question was, are you sure? If I summarize.
They have to deal with them, but have they?
Yeah, have you responded? So so first of all, I believe this is true that most biologists have to take an ethics course in college because of the complexities of medicine. I also believe that engineers have to take an ethics course because they build stuff that might kill people. I also know that there's something called the Pugwash Institute that has been helping physicists think about what they are doing. So I do think that there has been more infrastructure. I think there's also responsibility. So for example, I've seen stories where researchers discovered deadly viruses and won't publish the gene sequence, right? They'll publish the story about it, but they won't publish the specific sequence. So I think there's more maturity in those fields than there is in computer science, I contend. Yeah. Okay. I think you had a question. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're kind of in this arms race where you're participating in building weapons in the sphere of education. And I think that, you know, education is more likely to push, like our colleague was saying, on open sourcing things. Like, do we see this going the other direction, being commercialized? Like, you know, if you were trying to call me, I would love to have a software, or if a deep fake of you were trying to call me, I'd love to have a software that says, hey, like, this is probably not who you think it is.
Yeah.
I like spam ID.
Yeah. So the question is some of the technology for detection being commercialized? Okay. I don't know the full space of what everybody's doing around the world, obviously, but here's what I can tell you. A lot of what I'm seeing being commercialized is not the detection, but the creation. Startup is commercializing the creation of deepfakes. These aren't bad people, by the way. They're not setting out to do bad things. There are many interesting applications of deepfakes, like dubbing movies, right? You get a movie in one language, you want to create another, you create a lip sync deepfake, super cool. You can do automatic translation of a movie. So go to Netflix, you want to listen to any language, you can do it. It's really cool. Most of it is for Hollywood special effects and sadly for the metaverse. So I've seen a lot of that. I've not seen a lot of commercialization of any that I can think of the defense side. And I think part of the reason for that is that I still think there's a lot of money to be made on defense. Yet. Because who wants to defend against disinformation? Journalists. How much money do journalists have? None. Right? And disinformation is highly politicized. Right? Conservatives and Democrats view disinformation very differently. So I don't know if that is the reason, but I can't think of anybody right now commercializing the defense side of things. That's unfortunate, by the way, because I think if you really want to make something that works, you got to get out of the hand of one guy sitting in that office right there, right? I think we got to be better than that. But I think what's going to have to happen is that the problem is going to have to get much, much, much worse. Look, so for example, there's pretty good cybersecurity tools for spam and malware and viruses because the problem got so prohibitive we had to do something about it. I think these problems are still in their infancy. I think they're going to grow and they're going to get worse because that's the trend we've been seeing for the last few years. And I think at some point there's going to be a breaking point. And I think then the capitalism and the market will start to say, okay, we need a solution for this. And then what does that solution look like?
Well, and don't you think at some point the government, like if one government is using it against another government, you end up with a similar situation to, you know, Lockheed Martin or Northrop Grumman making a ton of money building defense mechanisms.
Yeah. Yeah, so the question is when governments start doing this kind of warfare, certainly the defense contractors are going to get into it. And I can tell you, without going into details, the governments are working on defense, absolutely, and offensive, by the way. But that's all very confidential, and that's not going to reach out to the public. That's national security agencies. Yeah.
Okay, so we're at time right.
Come see me at it.
Let me suggest that, yeah, there are others who have questions. Maybe Hany can remain for a few minutes up on stage. But let's otherwise thank Hany for this great talk and for the great discussion.